Well, this is Joan with the Joan Jerkovich Show, and we're back with our guest, Wes Jackson. Wes, I want to start out by talking about sustainability.
Yeah.
You know what I would say? Have you ever been called the father of sustainability? That's how I see you.
Well, I wrote a paper called Search for a Sustainable Agriculture, that 1978 paper. So I've been given credit for that. But I think the word was just in the air. And I talked to Bob Rodale about this many years ago. He says that Lady Balfour in England, who was head of the Soil Association, first used the word sustainable. I've never checked on that
And
myself.
what year would have that been?
Well, that'd been back in the 1940s.
In the
sometime.
40s?
Yeah. So, I mean, it's a term that was in the air, that when I first published the paper in the Land Report, I called it the Search for a Permanent Agriculture. And of course, I knew that there was something not right about that, although that's a term that is in Catholicism as a virtue, the idea of permanence. But then, I don't know how sustainable came along. I think it was in the air. I've had to defend the term because I've had some rather hostile questioning. Give me a definition of sustainable, and then give me a good example. And it better be short. And so my response is, give me a definition of justice and give me a good example.
Exactly.
That when you're dealing with value terms, they're subject to the vicissitudes of history. And those that sort of formulate deal with the term have to protect the term because it has all language is metaphorical. And so I've had to defend it. And there's a fair number of intellectuals that want to attack it and so on, want to call it something else. I don't object to the term resilience. I think that's a perfectly good term.
Does that get the same attack that sustainability
the
does?
The value of resilience comes out of ecology, and that has a formal way of dealing with it. There's a mathematical way that you can deal with it. Sustainable, though, what I like about it is it came out of the people, and it's here. Now, it's been perverted and talking about sustainable development, which is just nuts. I mean, you can have sustainable intellectual development.
What is sustainable development?
Well, what they really
What
mean
are you
is how we're
speaking?
going to sustain an extractive economy. Well, you don't sustain an extractive economy. I mean, that's strength through exhaustion.
And I have to jump in here because I gave my husband George, and you and George are the intellects. And seriously, when the two of you get talking, Wes, I have to literally have my husband interpret what you guys are saying because you get over my head pretty quick.
You poor
So
thing.
here's one of his
You
intellectual
poor thing. I
questions,
don't know
and you
what
are
we're
going to love
do
this
with
question.
You're going to have to just chloroform you. Since it's no
I'm
hope for you.
worthless. I'm worthless.
Yeah.
I agree. But anyway, here's one of my husband's questions, and this goes right into what you were talking about. He says, do you, Wes, feel that today's economic system is sustainable? And you were just starting to head into that.
Well, the answer is no. I started earlier there talking about, say, bacteria on a petri dish.
Right.
And you just go until the sugar is
Till the
gone,
sugar's
the
gone.
bacteria, or the Drosophila flies, or a deer without predators. The population just goes. They're going after energy-rich carbon because we're carbon-based. Life on planet Earth is carbon-based.
Right.
All right. So what I see humans doing, and we have the powerful ability for abstractions, is that we've created an economic system that's good at rushing to the edge of the petri dish. And then we put in laws in order to be fair as we rush to the edge of the petri dish. But we're not addressing.
Which you're not going to do anything at some point. It's
we've
still, the
got-
sugar's going to run out.
We've got to figure out a law of return. How do you get those nutrients back into the field? How do you, if you're going to be mining ore in the Minnesota Iron Range and you're processing it in Gary, Indiana, and you're building tractors in Moline, Illinois, or in Iowa, then one has to acknowledge that this is an extractive approach. Now, I don't think we're ever going to get away from, extraction, but the rate of growth, which is rewarded with the models that we have. In know, and so people say, well, what do you want, communism? No, communism is just a way the group is trying to get to the edge of the petri
Yeah, they're just all
nation
doing it in one unit.
and be fair, you know. That's sort of the goal,
social
although,
classes.
and so it failed. But our system is gonna fail too.
Mhm.
And we've got to think hard. And what I've noticed is it doesn't matter whether you're talking about Wall Street or Main Street. You find people, if you scratch them a bit, you know, move them, scratch below that surface, you can get them to acknowledge that we are involved in deficit spending of the Earth's capital, whether it's the oil, the natural gas, the coal, the soil carbon, the forest carbon, or the iron or whatever. And there is one law that will never be repealed, and that's the second law of thermodynamics. It's the entropy law. Things wear out.
True, true. But you know, you gave me a little ray of hope, because some of this, when it gets really scientific and really deep, it just my, you know, should be chloroformed intellect, you know, that what I can grasp, is you gave me this little piece of hope that it is renewable. Our resources are renewable.
Well, agriculture.
Because I'm so worried, and you know, they may be renewable, but we're not going to give them time.
Yeah, let me put it this way. If we don't get sustainability in agriculture first, it's not going to happen. And I'll say it for this reason. Agriculture ultimately has a discipline standing behind it. And that discipline is the rather mature discipline of ecology and evolutionary biology, and in recent times the modern molecular synthesis, which is the understanding of the DNA code and so on, that's been added. So now the material sector, the industrial sector, doesn't have any discipline standing behind it that can inform it. In other words, if you look at a prairie, or a redwood forest, or a tropical rainforest, or an alpine meadow, those are real economies. They feature material recycling, and they run on contemporary sunlight. There's nothing phony about those economies. So if we can look to the way those economies work as a source for our metaphors in organizing a society, and that's one reason I think our work is important at the land, because we're trying to build an agriculture based on the way the prairie works, but gives us grain. Conza Prairie is a wonderful place. The only thing it doesn't do is provide us grain. What we're doing, of course, is making perennial grain crops like the wheat, the sorghum, the corn, the so on. So if we could do that and then say, okay, here is nature's economy, and then here is the human agricultural economy, now we can say, here is a source of new ideas, and we can begin to think about a blossoming. I think that we've had 3 syntheses since 1859. That was Darwin's Origin of Species. That unified biology. But he didn't have a theory of heredity. But in 1937, Theodosius Dobzhansky, a geneticist at work in the lab, had come out of the Ukraine, and out of the natural history tradition, he brought about the second synthesis, genetics and the origin of species. And then there's Watson and Crick, and the elucidation of the structure of the DNA code. That's the third synthesis. Now, those 3 syntheses, after every one of them, there's been a flowering, a blossoming. Now we're saying, let's take ecology, evolutionary biology, and have a marriage with agriculture. And we can do that now because with the perennial, we're no longer clear cutting every year. With the annuals, you're clear cutting, and you're losing your ecological processes. So I think we can bring ecology to inform a research agenda, and at the same time, well, it is informing our agenda, at the same time, provide the metaphors for a world to run on renewables.
And this is still in the 100-year plan you're talking about?
Yeah, I think that this is the period of the great transition.
Okay. Well, Wes, thank you for that, and I've got a really interesting question that I know the listeners are really going to want to hear your opinion on when we come back.
Okay.
It has something to do with the end of the world. And
Wow.
I'll give you a little teaser on that, but you're
Okay.
listening to Joan with the Joan Jerkovich Show, and we'll be right back.